President of the Terrence Group, one of America's leading national pollsters, Mr. Ed Goeas.
Good morning, and I have to say it's good to be back in Oklahoma, my home state, after so many years in Washington. I do come back fairly often, though, because I'm the pollster both for Governor Mary Fallin and for Senator James Lankford. And there were a lot of races that we worked in 2014. I mean, one of the things I'd like to say before we get into the actual numbers is we really saw where we were going as a party in the 2014 election. Not only was my firm involved in re-electing Mary Fallin, Scott Walker in Wisconsin, Governor John Kasich in Ohio, Governor Rich Snyder in Michigan, and Brian Sandoval in Nevada. We had some new senators that we were able to bring into the Senate. And quite frankly, in looking at the Senate this year, we had about the best class of new senators coming to Washington that I've seen in the entire time that I've been in Washington. Not only James Lankford joining that team, there was Cory Gardner from Colorado, Ben Sasse from Nevada, and Joni Ernst from Iowa. What we saw in those races was the intensity of the Republican vote versus the Democratic vote, and it's something that's not talked about very often in terms of the polling data that you may see and read on the national public polls that are out there. Two things I've seen over the years that come into play in terms of our polling. There's two factors I've seen in Washington that causes a disconnect with the voters out there. One is a certain amount of intellectual elitism, if you will. Washington very often has this attitude that if I give you the same information I have, if you do not come to the same conclusions I've come to, then you're stupid. And they treat the voters that way. They don't understand that every voter has their own life experiences that serve as a filter for that information. And that information becomes very important to them. The other is, I'm very sorry sometimes to see how few people in Washington understand the basics of problem solving. The basics being that you talk about the problem, then you talk about solutions, then you implement solutions, and that always causes a new set of problems. And we have been through that cycle so many times in Washington that at the end of the day, very often the problems we are dealing with are problems created by their solutions and not dealing with the root problems. And that's very important in terms of disconnect with the voters because they see that those basic problems are not there. And one of the things I was very proud of in the 2014 campaign, at least with the races that I worked with the governors and senators, is they understood that. They were all about unraveling that system that you were going through of dealing with problems created by the solutions and really getting down to the root problems that are there. Now, in the 2016 election, one of the things I'm seeing that is going to be very, very clear in terms of this election is that this election is going to be about the middle class. And there's been a lot of talk back and forth, is the middle class really something that we should be talking about as a party? The bottom line is when you ask voters, are you upper income, middle class, lower income, that 70% of the voters say that they call themselves middle class. It is a huge factor in terms of what is there. And one of the things, and no offense to any of the more well-to-do people in the audience, but there's a very strong feeling amongst the middle class that the rich get special benefits, the poor get the programs, and the middle class gets the bill. And that is very much what this election is going to be about as we go forward, as I'm sure you're hearing from a lot of the candidates that are out there that you'll see in either yesterday or today and tomorrow. In looking at the election also, something that is extremely important is that presidential elections are always about the future. Off-year elections are always about the past. It's about the past 2 years of the administration. Are they doing things right or are they doing things wrong? Presidential races are always about the future. Where are we going to take the country? Where are we going in terms of the future of the country? And that's where I see the Democrats having a deep hole. They have, in fact, if you want to look at right direction, wrong track for the country, you hear a lot of discussion about how the country believes that we are off on the wrong track. My most recent poll, which was 2 weeks ago, had 65% saying wrong track, only 26% saying that the country is going in the right direction. What is never talked about in the public polls is the intensity of that feeling. 54% of the American public feel strongly that the country is going off on the wrong track, with only 11% feeling strongly it's going in the right direction. And we always have a little trouble finding those people in our polling. The other factor that will come into play is the feelings about President Obama. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about where President Obama's job approval is, that he's at we had him at a 45% approve, 49% disapprove, which is about where all the public polls have him. The average of all the polls today, I checked this morning, has him at a net 5 points down. What is never reported in the public polling is the intensity of that feeling. 42% of the country, almost as many people who feel favorable towards the president or approve of the job he is doing, disapprove strongly of the job he is doing. And that intensity becomes very, very important in the race. The only concern that we have to have is that we don't spend too much time talking about this and let this pull us into just talking about the past, that we make sure in our campaigns we're talking about the future and where we're going to take the country. Now, there's a myriad of problems out there, certainly, but they fall basically in two areas. One is the economic area, and the other is the myriad of threats that we have in terms of this country. And that comes very much into play in the feelings about the that the American public hold. If you look at the most important issue for the next president to deal with, you have it dominated with economic issues. The economy at 23%, jobs at 14%, foreign threats at 12%, healthcare at 10%, but I guarantee you most of those people answering healthcare is because of healthcare cost and the current Obamacare not working. The deficit at 8%, illegal immigration at 8%, Social Security at 4%, and taxes at 3%. But when you combine those economic issues, you really see the driving force that is there with the American public in terms of those issues. If you go to the economic issues and take a look at it, creating jobs is the #1 issue that the voters mention in terms of economic issues. Reducing the deficit and increasing wages and benefits are both at 13%. Reducing the cost of health care, 10%. Reducing the high cost of higher education, 10%. Cutting taxes, 7%. Eliminating burdensome regulations at 7%. And helping ensure our secure retirement is at 4%. But again, there's a variety of different issues here that kind of combine into an issue of concern about the economy. In fact, I'm seeing really three things kind of driving the concerns of the American public. One is the economy, the other is foreign threat, and third is the American dream. I'll come back to that in a second. The next slide, which was a very interesting question that we've asked over the years, is what is your preference for your presidential candidate? Is it views that closely match your own, or is it most effective in getting things done? Again, this is a reflection of the concern that the American public has about the direction of the country. Normally, when we ask this question, we get kind of an even match between the two going into the election. I've never seen an election since Ronald Reagan in 1980 that I saw this being a huge drive. We want someone who is effective, and I think it's a reflection of what we're seeing overall out there. As I mentioned, the three concerns, one is the economy. When we ask, are you concerned about the economy, it's not on this chart. When you ask about concern on the economy, we have 72% of the American public concerned that the economy is going to take an economic downturn. It is very much in the psyche of the American public that not only is the economy not going well and the direction of the country not going well, but they're very concerned about that other shoe falling that's going to drag down our economy again. The other thing that we do see, and we tried to be very specific on this question to really capture what we're seeing and what we're seeing in focus groups with the American public, is that the psyche of what is happening with ISIS has really permeated the thoughts of the American public. We asked in this question, are you worried that you or your immediate family, we were very specific, you or your immediate family would be the target of a terrorist attack, and we only had 26% say that, no, I'm not at all worried. After 9/11, we asked this similar question, and that's where the term security mom came. What we found was men in the large cities, Chicago, Washington, New York, LA, were concerned about their family. Women everywhere were concerned about their family. You could be in the most remote area of Montana and they still were afraid of a terrorist attack on the family. Today, it is equally true of men and women everywhere across the country that they are concerned about this terrorist attack. And where this links back into the economy is waiting for that other shoe to fall. And when you think about the stories that have occurred, not only what was happening with the beheadings and happening with the pilot over in the Syrian pilot, Jordanian pilot over in Syria, is that we've had almost a constant weekly flow of stories over the last 2 months of people planning bombing attacks, of people wanting to go over and join ISIS, of people wanting to attack in the name of ISIS, this country. And so there's very much a concern that we're just one mistake away from not being able to catch these people before they do something wrong. The third thing that I am seeing, and this is going to be very, very important when we get to the election, is what I call the American dream question. Do you believe the next generation will do as well financially as your generation? Now, in the Reagan campaign in 1980, one of the things that we saw and changed some of the narrative that we used in that Reagan campaign was when, for the first time, those people thinking that the next generation would do better dropped below 50%. Today, it's only at 25%. These are worse numbers in terms of the American dream than we saw under the years of Jimmy Carter. And that says an awful lot about what is coming in this election. So kind of going back and talking about the Democrats in the next election, I'm loving this narrative that is out there that the Democrats are going to replicate the 2008 electorate, the 2012 electorate. One of the things I saw in the races in 2014 is we, in a very big way, made up for the lost territory that we had in terms of the technology, in terms of our ability to identify our vote and to turn out our vote. One of the things we do have to be very careful of, and a lot of the states here are represented in this, is that we can't run a presidential campaign again where the total focus of that campaign is only in the presidential target states. If you look at the states that were non-presidential target states, 3 of the 4 points that Obama won the election by was won by him running up the vote in those states with young voters, single women, African Americans, and Hispanics. And we were not turning out our Republican vote in those states. And that's where you got this skew in terms of the turnout and the operation. Now, we made up for that in 2014. One of the things I enjoyed in terms of watching the races and doing the polling in the races in both Colorado and in Iowa is, if you remember the stories at the end, those were 2 of the states that were wondering what was going to happen at the end. Because all the public polls were coming out saying it was a very, very close race, maybe the Republican up a point or 2. What we were seeing internally is the intensity of our vote in knowing we had matched the Democrats on their operation, is that we saw in Colorado our polling headed at a 6-point advantage, and we won that race by 6 points. In Iowa, we saw it move to 8 points in the last weekend, and Joni Ernst won that election by 8.5 points. Meanwhile, the Democrats, all they kept saying is, if we turn out our vote, if we turn out our vote. This is an election that is going to be very important for Republicans, in terms of being able to communicate not only to our base, not only to the independents, and as I said, the middle-class voters in a much broader way, but we need to make sure in each and every state we are turning out that vote. In my home state here in Oklahoma, there was an 8-point drop-off between 2008 and 2012 of the voters who turned out in that election. When looking at the data from that election, about half of that vote that dropped off and didn't vote were Republicans, and the other half were rural Democrats, our voters. At the same time there was that 8% drop-off, there was an increase of the young vote, an increase of the African American vote, an increase of the Hispanic vote, and an increase of single women, younger single women. At the same time that was happening. The Obama campaign was even touching those voters in the reddest state in the country, Oklahoma. So in looking at the race, we have all the right factors. I'm loving the Hillary Clinton out there saying that she wants to be a champion for the average voter. At the same time, she's talking about we still need to make $500,000 per speech. Most of the middle class would like to have one of those speeches about every 10 years. I think we could kind of live on it. And they're just very tone deaf in terms of what is there. The other thing I'm seeing in the data with Hillary Clinton is the email situation that she got herself into is not about the specifics. Not about the specifics. It's about, it reminded people that the Clintons operate under a different set of rules in this country. And when that was driven home, her numbers, her favorables dropped 20 points and her unfavorables came up 25 points, and she now has unfavorables that are higher than her favorables. She also has over 50% of the voters saying they will not be able to bring themselves to vote for her. The interesting thing, for all the news media talk in this country about the crowded Republican field, that is good for our party. At some point, one of these candidates or several of these candidates are going to find lightning in the bottle, and that's going to just explode their numbers in contrast to Hillary Clinton. And when that happens, I think we're looking at an election that is going to be adding the White House to the long list of other wins we have in state legislatures and in state houses across the country. Thank you.